Welcome to Decades of Horror, the classic era.
In my hunt for food, I had become the hunted. This time I survived, but I was no longer alone in my universe. I had an enemy, the most terrifying ever beheld by human eyes.
This is episode 83, recorded September 20th, 2020. I am your host, Jeff Mohr, and on this podcast we cover the good, the bad, maybe even the ugly horror films released since the beginning of time through 1969. In each episode, we'll discuss the monsters, spirits, psychos, and villains that have haunted movie-going audiences since the dawn of film history. With me this week are my incredible co-ghosts, Whitney Collazo, an accomplished artist, makeup artist, and writer. How are you doing, Whitney?
Little old me. I'm good. You?
Yes, I am. I am doing good. Also with us is Chad Hunt, co-host on Decades of Horror, the 1970s and 1980s, a film producer and director with Wreak Havoc Productions, and a comic book artist and writer. Chad, what's happening?
Not a whole lot. It's the cooler weather's setting in, and I'm very happy about that. Fall's coming, and I'm just dancing around, just acting crazy because of the cold weather. That's all I'm doing.
Due to his job and other commitments, Joseph Perry's taken a hiatus. And though he could never be replaced, rounding out the crew for this episode is Ralph Miller, special effects artist and unofficial Decades of Horror Grue-Crew irregular. How are you, Ralph?
I'm great. I'm honored to be an unofficial whatever it is you said I am. That's amazing.
An unofficial irregular. I don't even know what that is.
Oh, there we go.
Well, at our age, that could mean two different things.
Well, and we are spanning the continent today. We got East Coast, middle of the country, and West Coast.
West Coast.
Amazing.
We should keep everybody happy. Our topic this episode is The Incredible Shrinking Man from 1957, directed by Jack Arnold, written by Richard Matheson, both the novel and the screenplay, and starring Grant Williams, Randy Stuart, and April Kent. When Scott Carey begins to shrink because of exposure to a combination of radiation and insecticides, medical science is powerless to help him. That's like the double whammy, right?
Yeah.
Radiation and chemicals.
Oof, not good.
Not a bit. So, assuming you've seen this, and if you haven't, you should go do that right now. It is 1957? That would make that 63 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Did I have that right?
That's
60.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Anyway, this was produced by Universal International Pictures. And this is one of those movies that's got a whole bunch of release dates. February 22nd of 1957 in New York City, March 27th in LA, and April 29th nationwide. It's also known as, and I forgot to check the pronunciation of this, but I just love this German title. It's the only one that was really, really different. Die unglaubliche Geschichte des Mr. C.
Oof.
I am going to take your word on that.
Sure.
That's correct.
Which means the incredible story of Mr. C. It was filmed at Universal Studios, at Universal City in California. Filming dates were May 20th, 1956 to mid-July 1956. Estimated budget was around $750,000, and I put the highest number I found in here for domestic box office, which was $4.1 million from Ultimate Movie Rankings.
Nice return.
Yeah, I saw some lower ones that were based on theater rentals. So I don't know exactly how they adjusted between that, but that seems pretty good. Plus, it had multiple releases over the years. About every decade, I think, this was re-released. Okay, and we have some strange taglines here. Or maybe not strange, but they just are strangely written. So, Chad, I just have a feeling you got your tagline voice going here. Would you care to read these?
Oh my God. Okay. Almost beyond the imagination, a strange adventure into the unknown.
Yeah.
Nice.
Almost.
Okay.
Almost. Okay.
That was the UK theatrical
Yeah.
tagline.
All right. I'm going to save the other one till last. But the next one, a fascinating adventure into the unknown, which is exactly almost like the first tagline I just read.
Mm-hmm.
The most incredible story ever. Ever.
I like
So
how
I'm
that
not-
comes.
Ever.
So I'm not giving audience to any dissension on that. Hour by hour. It's ever, Jeff. Just be quiet. It's ever.
All
It
right.
says ever, but so you can't argue.
Ever?
We never have taglines like that. Never.
Not ever.
Ever.
Hour by hour, he gets smaller and smaller.
I like how whoever entered the tagline put a underscore
dash,
before
and then an
the
underscore.
exclamation point. Like, I guess the excitement comes after you say that somehow. Anyway,
Or an echo, maybe. And smaller.
I can see that.
Moment by moment, the terror mounts. Except in the first 30 minutes. That's what it should have said. All right. Lastly, but not leastly, let me catch a breath here. Victim of weird mist. Day by day he shrinks. Science is baffled. Cat becomes monster. Terror at every turn. Deadly spider attacks. Lost in a flood's fury.
Bravo.
Oh, no.
the scene by scene tagline.
Yeah, that's just
Ralph's like, I don't
synopsis.
know what I got myself into this time.
Okay.
I'll vote with the first one. I think that was better than the last one.
Yeah.
I'd
Definitely.
go with that. Although it'd be cats and spiders. Okay, well let's go with first impressions, and I'm going to let our guest Ralph go first. When was the first time you saw The Incredible Shrinking Man, and your impressions then, and what about now this time around?
Yeah, I'd say that I must have seen this when I was a kid on TV, which would make it many years ago. I don't know exactly when, but a long time ago. And I do remember enjoying this quite a bit. You know, we've had a number of movies with bugs that are big, people that are small, people that are big, all of this kind of thing. But I think this is definitely one of the better ones. And it holds up really well. This time I watched it a few times. The first time just to let it, just sink in and just feel the feels. And then the next time around, I had a more critical eye. I was looking at trying to figure out how they did the various visual effects and things.
Mhm.
But I'd say, sure, you can pick apart things and say, well, if it was done with CG today, they could take care of this little problem. But if you can get past that, and it's easy to, since for the most part, it's really solid, I think it's a classic. Absolutely.
Yeah, I will definitely agree with that. Whitney, how about you? When was the first time you saw this? And if this is a second viewing, how did it come across now?
Well, first time I got to see this was last night, actually. So
Excellent.
Join
yeah,
the club.
gosh, I don't know what to say. As far as things are really big and he's really small. I just feel okay. I don't know. I'm really bad with subgenres, in terms of like horror, but I don't know if this counts as what people would call like body horror. I don't know, but I feel like going in that state and we talked earlier about it, Jeff, like prior to we started getting involved in getting the recording going, and you said that it scared you, and I can see how it could scare somebody as a kid, because if I watched it as a kid, seeing someone go through some strange sprays or insecticides or whatever in their lives and their bodies and their health are being altered, and they're just slowly like deteriorating in some form, even in their size, that I could see that just genuinely being freaky. But no, I thought it was pretty cool seeing the production design, and I guess seeing so many things being built in the sets and everything, and then creatures like cats and tarantulas and
oh my.
Well, it was fun. So yeah.
Tarantulas, cats, and birds. Oh my.
Yes.
Cool. I'm really going to be interested in hearing some of in more detail what you thought as somebody that was seeing it for the first time. Mr. Chad Hunt, how about you?
I saw this. I've always seen pictures of it in magazines and stuff like that, but I was very late seeing this. It had to have been in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I remember I had an old set of Universal Monsters trading cards, which showed a lot more of the movie. And so I became really interested in it. It looked really, really cool. So the first time I watched it, I was just amazed by the visual effects and how much detail they put into the giant props and stuff like that. And what a great job they did of it. And it was, for me back then, it was a little slow at first. But then as soon as he started living in the dollhouse, it sort of kicked into high gear, and it turned into a great adventure story. And I totally loved it. I did. It was just, it made you, well, Matheson always does this, but he opened up just a world, the same way he did in Last Man on Earth. And he just creates these worlds that these characters live in that are just so vivid and alive. And it made you think things that we take for granted every day that we see, it's just like a cat or a lamp falling off a table, become these deathly or, dangerous things, that can kill us if we're the size of him. And so then that's what really made me love the movie were those aspects of it. And now looking at it now, there were some scenes where I think they should have named it The Incredible Shrinking Jerk. Because he was just, I don't know. I didn't, back then when I first saw it, I didn't look at it in a character sense or how the characters were relating to each other. But this time I sort of did, not meaning to, but I just did. He came off as very cold, and Scott Carey did. And I could be, you guys maybe have different takes on it, but he came off as sort of, the smaller he got, the jerkier he got. I mean, I know they were probably trying to show that he was trying to deal with this, but it made those parts of that made me not like his character very much. I didn't really start liking his character more until he started trying to survive and he started seeing things differently about where his place was in the universe and that kind of thing. So, and I'm not saying that was a bad thing that he was acting that way or anything. It just made him a very interesting character and gave him an arc by the end of the movie, maybe that I did not see the first few times I saw it. But yeah, really, I love this movie. What can I say? Universal put it out, and in some cases, some factions, he's just as much a part of the Universal monster team as Frankenstein, Dracula, and all the rest of those guys. So yeah, great movie. Still stands up very well to this day, I think.
Yeah, I agree. this follows a pattern of a lot of 50s sci-fi horror that I saw. Where I lived in central Iowa, they had a daily movie on during the weekdays at 4 o'clock I think it was called The Family Show, but they would have topic weeks. And so Science Fiction Week and Horror Week were the ones I lived for. And I got to see these over and over again. So Invasion of the Body Snatchers was one. What's the one with the Emer, 20 Million Miles to the Earth? That was one I saw a whole bunch of times. And Incredible Shrinking Man was one I saw a bunch. And it just captivated me. Everything from the whole idea of shrinking and how that affected him and what his relationship to everyday items, and then finally, going into the dollhouse and then down in the basement, and then his survival fights. As you said, Chad, it really kind of becomes an adventure story. He's fighting the unspeakable horror almost, and that is so well shot. The spider thing, and then the final scene really got to me. That was the first time. So I was about 10 when I saw this, and that final scene where he gets into this, and it's become common. I know it was dealt with a lot of times in comic books, but this idea of worlds within worlds kind of thing. You shrink down to where on the subatomic level are more galaxies and worlds and that kind of stuff. And this was the first time that was like hit me, and that just messed me up. I think. But I love that ending. I love it. So yeah, I loved it then. I love it now. I searched long and hard for a Blu-ray, and I'm a little disappointed that what's available. I ended up buying a Blu-ray that was released in Spain, and I think it's an all regions one, and has like half a dozen languages and subtitles on it, but there's no extras. And this is ripe for an extra. I saw another one that said it had an interview with Jack Arnold on it, so I don't know. And I think, Ralph, you have this, is that correct?
No, actually, I have it on a Sci-Fi Classics DVD that has I think 4 different movies, classic movies. And this is volume 2. Volume 1 is another great volume. All these amazing science fiction films from the 50s.
Oh, excellent. So yeah, I think this one is ripe for a deep treatment. Most of the people involved in it, I believe, are have passed away, but it would be nice to have some commentary with it and a real in-depth treatment, I guess.
It deserves it. This is it's a great film, and it really deserves to have that treatment just for the technical aspects of it alone. Maybe of how they did everything.
Yeah. So let's just talk about that to begin with. I know, Chad, as I'm watching the credits at the beginning of the movie, it listed Bud Westmore as special effects. Not your favorite guy. So what do we know? Any comments about the effects and how they did them? There's the whole, I don't know what, if you call it a forced perspective or the scaling of the decorations or furniture, et cetera, the props. But there's also some other things going on there that I don't really know exactly how they did it. Now you'd probably do green screen, but I don't know what you did back then.
It looked like there was some back where they put the character in front of a screen and show another character in the background on a couple of shots where his wife is sitting down and he's standing in front of her. Back projection, I think they call it. Looked like they did some of that. And I could have sworn, how a lot of those kind of movies where they show 2 people that are like supposed to be twins or something like that, but they're the same person and they split the screen. I'm pretty sure there was some of that, but it didn't The seams were very hard to find. It was so well done. I mean, I was looking for it, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, well, I can speak to this. Yes, definitely there was some rear screen projection. Most notably, like in the scene in the diner where he's talking to the small woman who's his size when he's 36 and a half inches. You can see a little person is saying, you know, we got a show coming up, so don't be too long. And that person is, you know, along with all the background is rear screen projection. You can see that the image looks a little bit different than the people in the foreground.
I thought they did a good job of having his focus in the right direction. It didn't.
Oh yeah,
it looked a little bit different in terms of sharpness, but in terms of where he looked, you didn't go, oh, he's not looking. That didn't stand out at all.
Well, actually, that's actually relatively easy to do with rear screen because they're actually seeing that projection at the time of filming.
Oh, okay. So they can position themselves to get.
They can look right at the screen and look where they're supposed to be looking. So that's not.
Well, I meant him too. I meant him too. The guy.
Oh yeah, right. That's true. That had to be worked out ahead of time, for sure. But there were a lot of shots that were done by other methods. As you say, of course, they had gigantic sets where everything's oversized. And I think it's especially interesting in the cellar where you have all these wood textures and cement texture and various, you know, foods and things that they had to scale up. And the texture is really very chunky, very, you know, extreme, and that's what things look like close up. You know, like if you look at your finger close up, those ridges are like valleys and hills, and if your fingers are dried, you know, and you see what that looks like up close, it's horrifying. You know, everything becomes like magnified to such a degree that it can be rather disturbing. Let's see. So of course there's the oversized sets, and then the regular sets with the regular sized people. And there were, like, as you say, Chad, there were scenes where they had a split screen. And so on the one side, you see Scott, and he's a little person by having him on a set where everything's oversized. And on the other half of the screen, you have his wife in the normal size set. And they did use split screens for these things, and they very carefully put the split in a place where it's not so noticeable, like along shadows and along furniture lines and curtain lines, things like that. And that was quite effective. Something else that was used quite a lot, as you were suggesting, Jeff, is traveling mats. Today, you would call it green screen. In those days, I read, it might have been in your notes, Jeff, that they filmed Scott against a black background, which is interesting because that's one of the cruder ways to do a traveling mat system. So a traveling mat is where you have an object or an individual or people filmed against some kind of a blank background, like green screen. And then they're going to be laid over on top of the background. In the case of what it's often done with a color separation sort of thing. And that's how green screen works, right? Digitally, the computer can detect that green and can just say, okay, that green is like a blank background and we're going to replace that. And anything that is not that color is going to be just fine. And my understanding is that one reason why in the digital realm, they went for green as opposed to other colors, like they used to use blue screen in America and yellow or sodium backing screen in England, is that blue wouldn't work so well in the rock video days when they were first doing electronic traveling mat systems. Because in rock videos, a lot of the acts were wearing blue jeans, and those would become transparent if you film blue against blue. So if you have a green background, that's fine because blue is a different color. So if you film against black, what you're then trying to do is you're going, okay, so this is film, which is different from the electronic media. You would film the person against black, and then you would make a negative of that. So you would have a clear background and a very dark looking figure. And that is going to serve as the matte that is going to block out the background for whatever portion that person is on. So it's going to cover up that background so that you don't see the background showing through like a ghost. But what's interesting about that is that if you're just going against black and that's how you're separating things, what about the shadows on the face and the body? You know, if there is anything that's really dark, that can be problematic. So it's possible that they might have gone in and touched it up, done a little crude rotoscoping inside of the black figure so that they could then pull a good, really block out the background so it doesn't show through. Doesn't always work perfectly. There's one scene where Scott is at the top of the stairs and you can see a picture frame through him, I think. But for the most part, it's pretty effective. One way you can tell that they're using a traveling matte, the most obvious ways are if you see a black line around the person or a white line or some other color of line in colored movies. That's a tip-off that they're using this kind of process. Because if there's not a perfect fit of the blockout matte and counter matte, the black silhouette of the person, if it's not a perfect fit, then you're going to see either a black outline or a light or colored outline. The other thing is if you don't see any shadows of the person as they're walking along, you can tell then that they weren't actually in that environment. There are ways you can get around it these days, but in those days, that's often how it was. And you can see like when he's very small and he's walking into the diner, it's a long shot out exterior of the diner and you see him walking in and you don't see any shadows, but you see shadows with other people as they're walking through. Yeah. Also, in some cases, like if he's walking through light and shadow, you should see that affecting how he's lit as he walks through. And it wasn't always the case in this movie. So that's another way you can tell that that's how they did that thing. But that's basically it. You've got your rear screen, you've got your traveling mats, you've got your split screen. You can use these in combination. But, and of course the oversized sets and props, which were really amazing.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's the basic breakdown of how I believe they did these shots.
Yeah, and I agree. I could see that dark line in some areas, although definitely forgivable. And I mean, it wasn't so glaring that I was taken out of it. I also noticed the shadows, but I think maybe because I had read about it beforehand. There's that scene where he's going to the circus, I think, and he's walking down the street and he meets a couple and you see shadows of them and it just seems a little bit off, but anyway, for the most part, yeah. And I did read something in there where it said, like for instance, shots with Randy Stuart as his wife, Louise, were taken against a black velvet backdrop and then composited with shots of Williams or Carey on an enlarged living room set. So that seemed to be I didn't see any lines there. The times I saw the lines were around Carey and separate shots. Yeah,
they would be combined in the optical printer, and sometimes you can do little tweaks, but many of the shots were pretty seamless. So that's really cool. These days with electronics and digital, I mean, they can finesse and massage every frame of the picture until they run out of money and time. Whereas in those days, there were limits to what they could do.
Well, do you guys maybe Chad, you remember, or Whitney, but when we did The Invisible Man, I remember reading about how they used this black velvet, even back in 1933, I think it was, and that they actually seemed like they kind of pioneered that.
Yeah, I remember that.
So interesting. Appreciate that, Ralph.
Sure.
Other comments about special effects? Any scenes that stood out, Whitney?
Well, the one where since we're talking about how the screens had looked in some of the shadowing or versus not seeing any shadow at all, and just with the acting in general, seeing Scott, the character, near the trash can or that bin. So seeing him and looking in the directions and pacing and within his own self and his self-awareness and I think that was prior to the scene of where he met the smaller lady, right? Correct?
Yes, right. Because that's right. We've just introduced the carnival, and you've got the Barker who's talking about the sideshow with the little people and everything, and he refers to them as freaks. So Scott finds this upsetting.
Yes, see, that's exactly it. That's exactly the thing, because he's right. I feel like that's a point of seeing that emotion in him, and actually. When you're seeing him near that trash can and then that background looking the way it is, that's where he's in. I feel like that's like his pensive state before going into this next transition and meeting someone like him is the thought process of what's really happening, of more of what's happening, rather.
Yeah, he is really kind of hiding his face from the couple that are walking past him too from behind.
Yeah.
And shame, his shame anyway, whether it's justified or not.
One of the other effects that really is to this day that I watch is the spider fight. That is just the way that they were able to make those two interact with each other. Still just makes me white knuckle whatever I'm holding on to while I'm watching the movie.
Yeah.
Even complete with gore, spider gore, and everything. So just goo falls out. and that was really a terrifying sequence, because this he was down there with this spider. He knew it could be anywhere, and it was kind of hunting him in a way. Just the way they pull that off with him underneath the spider, and the spider's kind of kicking him around a little bit, and just a great scene. And I think besides the cat, the most iconic and the one they used the most in advertising the movie and marketing for the movie and stuff like that. To me, anyway, I thought it was more interesting than the cat one. The cat was after him, sure, and the cat was doing the same thing, hunting him throughout the house, but he was really trapped in the basement. There was really nowhere for him to go, and he knew it, and it just made the scene that much more tense, and just a great scene.
Well, back to the cat, like talking about some of these scenes and the things that we've seen that were what's been effective is he's in that dollhouse and he opens that door and then you see the cat just staring right in. So that was pretty intense too.
Yeah, I like to look at these things in terms of what is credible, what is not, what is based on biology and behavior that you would see in animals, and what is not. And I could look at a couple of things and pick them apart, not to belittle the movie. It's a classic, but like if a cat was pursuing prey, it's unlikely that it would be growling and yowling and making those kind of cat hiss faces. It would probably be more quiet. Sometimes cats make a unique little sound when they're hunting something, but it's not as dramatic. And what you see here is more of a threat display. Like if it was fighting another cat, it would make these kinds of expressions and sounds.
Right.
If it felt threatened itself, Whereas if it's in predator pursuit mode, it's probably not going to do this. On the other hand, it's much more exciting and dramatic that they do it this way. And so that makes perfect sense that they would do that. As far as the spider, you'll notice that it's a tarantula and it has an orb web.
Right.
You even see it sitting in the middle of an orb web.
That doesn't happen.
People who know spiders know that tarantulas, they are active pursuit predators. They are hunting spiders. They aren't, lie in wait, snare predators like an orb weaving spider is. Originally, the story had a black widow spider as opposed to a tarantula.
Right.
Now, they have webs, but if you know black widows, you know that their webs are not orb webs like the one that we saw. They would be more sort of a crazy quilts of just random strands that fill up space. That's a different kind of a web. And interestingly, if you brush your hand through black widow's web, as I have done because I've lived amongst black widows, it makes a crackling sound because the web is very brittle for some reason.
I thought I read that they had tried to, they were working on the black widow thing, and it visually it just wasn't working the same. And I would agree that at least everybody sees that hairy version of the tarantula and the way that it walks as being really creepy, I think.
It's a scarier looking spider.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know. Classically, people that don't know spiders and don't know, they always think, when they think of spiders, they think of tarantulas, to me. And that's probably what they were going for.
And in fact, the director used this very same spider in another one of his films, and that is Tarantula. And the spider's name was Tamara, by the way.
Might have been his comfort zone then, huh?
Well, they are very large. They're more controllable. They move more slowly. It would be much harder to hold focus on a smaller animal like a black widow, and they would move their legs very quickly, and it would be much harder to follow the action or to get them to do what you want them to do. That being said, tarantulas typically are not the most active of animals. I recently watched a documentary on the making of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and there's a scene where the tarantulas are all over the back of someone, and when they first filmed it, the tarantulas were live tarantulas all over the back. They just weren't moving, so they looked like rubber tarantulas. So what they did is they were all male tarantulas, and all they had to do was a female amongst them, and then they were very active all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Just like your typical bar scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I worked on Killer Clowns from Outer Space at the Kyoto Brothers studio, they had a tarantula in a terrarium, and one of my coworkers said, "That tarantula is the slowest creature I've ever seen. It hasn't moved in 3 days." Now another coworker said, "Oh yeah, I've seen something slower," referring to the person who was talking about spider, but that's they conserve energy. If there's something they're going after, then they'll go after it. But otherwise, they'll be digesting their food for a while and just kind of hanging there. So hats off to the people who wrangled this tarantula, because they did a great job.
Yeah. I guess, but for me, at the age of like 10 or 11 when I saw it, the way that they shot that tarantula, kind of like Chad, and the close-ups of the underside, the fangs.
Oh, yeah.
Was just terrifying. And sticking that, I was like, oh my God, what's, the first time I saw this, I was like, holy shit, he's gonna. Now, one of the things I noticed here, again, it's probably well known, I'm not a cat fan, but but I thought one of the most disturbing things in here, even though the cat scene wasn't as graphic and they used sort of blurry, I don't know exactly if that was like, cat paws swiping at him and knocking him down, but when we see the rip and on a big back then, it's not really good effects makeup to show a gash on his back, but I thought that was kind of cool. And then when his wife finds his bloody sleeve or pant leg or whatever that was, that was I don't know, that was sort of like,
yeah.
No wonder she thought he was dead.
Yeah.
Right. And just after she looks at that scrap of bloody cloth, she sees the cat, and she says the cat is licking its chops.
Yeah.
Now, of course, if the cat had actually consumed a man of that size, there would probably be a much bigger mess somewhere than that little scrap of fabric. But as we know, that's not what actually happened. He didn't get eaten by the cat. And she wasn't aware until that point that the cat was in the house. And at that point, she's like, uh-oh.
Yeah. Well, even then, she still wasn't convinced. As she was talking to his brother, she was going, I just have a feeling he might still be here and he needs help.
Yeah, she felt awful that she wasn't there for him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which, if you did have the husband the size of, a couple inches tall, you might want to put the cat away or something. But the wind blew the door open, didn't it?
Yeah, well, have it right. She was just going out for a little bit to go to the corner to shop, and then she's coming right back. But as soon as the door opened, the cat came in, and she closed the door, and she didn't see the cat coming in. Yeah, so that makes sense.
That makes sense, yeah.
One more thing about special effects is there was the water dripping from the water heater. And,
Yes.
And so the way that was done to get it to look like drops instead of just, water pouring out or something to make it look to scale, they used condoms. They put the water inside of condoms. And in fact, the director said that he had discovered these condoms in his dad's drawer or something, and he didn't know what they were at the time, but he filled it up with water as a kid. And so he got a sense of what it was like to have a condom full of water. Then they had a conveyor belt that would drop these essentially water balloons, these condom water balloons, one after the other in a regular pattern, just like the dripping water that you see in full scale from the water heater. They did a very similar thing in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which is a much more modern version of this idea of people shrinking and dealing with, creatures that are way too big for them. And in that case, instead of water, they filled the condoms with slime. So when they splashed, they made a splash that was even more to scale, that looked more correct in terms of how it moved. But still, it's interesting that even all these years later, the same idea was used. And the director said that he bought 100 gross of these condoms. And a gross is 12 times 12. So that means there were 14,400 condoms that they bought. And so the studio brought the director into their office and said, "What is this little item here? You bought 100 gross of condoms?" And he just said, "Well, listen, this was a grueling shoot and people needed a break. So we threw a party." And that's all he said. And the studio didn't ask him anything more about it.
Right. It's awkward in some forms. People don't understand it. I've had them in my makeup kit because of makeshift squibs and things for the blood and things. I mean, you do what you have to do to make the effect, and some of those things means to get whatever blood or gel, and then when you have it taped off or whatever for a squib or something. So that was my experience.
Yeah. I remember back in the 80s, in the 80s, makeup effects studios would figure whoever is the youngest and the most inexperienced person would be the one who should go to the store and buy lots of condoms and KY jelly. to embarrass him as much as possible.
Well, shouldn't that guy really be kind of proud of the fact? Hey, I don't know. I would have been.
He's got it going on. Look at all the comments.
What kind of movie are you making?
Yeah, and tell them that the only ones that work are the smallest sizes.
Oh, boy. Wow.
Okay.
Funny.
Was it Whitney? Was it?
No. Some jokes don't need to be made.
Oh, grow up, people. Grow up.
Well, since we sort of segued into that, let's talk about Jack Arnold. And is this his best horror/science fiction film?
Well, I don't know. He's got some tough contenders here.
Not in my
Creature from the Black Lagoon people.
Right.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I was baiting Chad a little bit.
Yeah, he was. He knows Creature is my favorite. That's why he said it. But yeah, he's he's done a lot of good stuff. The only thing that really ever disappointed me that he did was the Creature sequel. And I don't think that was his fault at all. I think that Revenge of the Creature, I think that was more studio involvement, I guess. I don't know. But they just made him make the same movie again, basically. But I love him. Whenever you see Jack Arnold's name on something, you knew you were going to get something interesting and good. To me at least. A very competent filmmaker.
Yeah, so a lot of these were ones that I saw on these same 4:00 movies after school during the weekdays. It Came from Outer Space was one that I particularly liked, which is that it's that same. To me, it's sort of the same concept of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. What if you weren't you kind of thing. Tarantula, Creature from the Black Lagoon was one of them. So yeah, it was good stuff. And then shortly after this, he kind of moved into television, and that's pretty much what he did after that. We've talked about him before as doing. He did 26 episodes of Gilligan's Island.
Yeah.
I know he did this drama, and I had noticed it was called Dr. Kildare. I don't know anything about it. I haven't seen it. But I did see one of the doctors played in a role in that film that was in this. One of the doctors in this film, I don't remember which one, but one of the doctors in this film
was it Dr. Kildare?
Was in that one as well. Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. So there was a couple of famous doctor shows when I was a kid. One was Dr. Kildare, and the other one was it Dr. Ben Casey or Ben Casey MD or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Dr. Ben.
What'd you say, Ralph?
There was also Marcus Welby MD, which
a
little later.
Yeah. That was a little later, but
he did a lot of Perry Mason, Peter Gunn, those shows. Even later on, The Fall Guy, Brady Bunch, the episodes of Wonder Woman with back in the day. So he did a lot of stuff.
Monster on the Campus. That's
Monster on the Campus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a very common story that people would start out doing feature films and then go into TV because TV was,
it started becoming
there was so much
popular
TV content being produced. Mm-hmm. Just like if you go on a studio tour, most of the stages are being used for television rather than movies these days, until recently when people stopped making things altogether. But yes, there's just so much content, so it can be a much steadier gig than waiting for the next feature to happen.
Now why have I not noticed that before? I'm not even sure I can say this anymore, but in 1974, there was a film called Boss N-Word, kind of a blaxploitation thing, starring Fred Williamson. And William Smith, our buddy from, what did we just see him in? Maniac Cop. in the 80s. Yeah. So Archie Armstrong. So I don't know. He did everything. I mean, he does comedies, westerns, detective shows, medical shows. He was a pretty hard worker. He's got 86 credits, but then that doesn't count all the multiple episodes of TV shows that he did. So, and I think he did a great job the way that he blocked a lot of these screens out. I suppose the cinematographer and the special effects people had a lot to do with that, but I thought it was well done.
Yeah, I read that they worked on the visual effects for 8 months.
Yeah.
Quite a long time.
Mm-hmm. And this had some interesting camera shots, like when he was in the box and it showed his point of view looking at the sides of the box. You didn't get too many shots like that in 1950s sci-fi. It was usually pretty straightforward. You didn't get very many weird camera shots, camera angles and stuff like that. So I thought that was an interesting thing that they went with that, his point of view.
Yeah, often you have a very wide angle lens, almost a fisheye, so that things that are closer look really close, things that are farther away look like they're miles away. And that's, I'm sure, what it would look like if you were the size of a doll, as he was.
Yeah.
And, you sometimes would have a slow tilt up, looking up to get a sense of how great a height something was from you. And that's important in widescreen aspect ratio. Our eyes, we have two eyes, so widescreen makes sense in that respect. But when you're trying to show something really tall, the way to really show that is to have the camera move, and that did happen several times in the movie.
Yeah, there was a. I thought it was kind of a fun shot when he's trying to cross the abyss on the paint stick.
Oh, yeah.
And he's dangling on it kind of, and it's sort of teetering, and he looks down into the box, and it's sort of a, zoom in and out thing, kind of a.
Yeah.
Like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you get shots from inside the box of looking up, and it was just some great camera work.
Oh, yeah. When he's hanging off the edge. Yeah. Because whenever I see somebody hanging on the edge like that, pulling themselves up, I can't help but visualize them like standing on a stool or something and fake
I always
straining.
imagine it's me falling.
Oh, well, but when they showed the one from the bottom, then I could get it. Then it was like, oh wow, he's really. So,
I think something interesting about the film is how it takes a little while before he's doll size or smaller.
Yeah.
The way that it's just gradually introducing the idea that he's changing in some way. So the film opens where they're on a boat on vacation, he and his wife, Louise, who he calls Lou, and she looks particularly young and attractive, and they both look so happy at that point in the sunshine. And then
there's some banter back and forth.
Nice writing there.
I thought that was great how she dealt with his.
Go get me a beer. Line.
I'm thirsty. Like she should just go.
Well, go get it.
It was witty. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they worked out a deal. He said, "Okay, I'll get dinner if you get the beer." She's like, "Okay," and he's like,
"That's usually something that will get us ladies to say, all right, fine, dinner's good."
Well, it's a compromise. I mean, he does something. Yeah. They do something for her. I'll do something for you. That's how it goes.
And they're playful. They're playful. He says, I think maybe we should get married. She says, we've been married for 6 years. He says, oh, it seems more like 6 days. It's really sweet. It's some very nice writing, which you'd expect from Richard Matheson.
Right.
Yes.
Gosh. Yes.
The internal narration from him, that's when I feel like that's when the writing got really, really good, especially at the end. I don't know if you guys want to talk about the end yet, but
we can get there.
We can.
Yeah. I found all that dialogue very, very interesting, and not only did it flesh his character out more and who he was and how he was feeling, but that was knowing that was mainly for the audience to let them know, because otherwise who would he be talking to,
Right.
So it was a good little trope there that they put in there, that he was writing all this down and so to give us the audience that inner dialogue that he was having.
Yeah, but it's interesting from that point of view because like today with a found footage movie, you always have to think about, okay, would the camera be rolling? Would it be in this spot? In this case, you think about, okay, is this what he wrote down? Because he was writing a book about his experiences as the incredible shrinking man so that he could make some money. Because as he said, he had no income coming in and he had a lot of bills mounting and, they owed a lot of money. So anyway, he agrees to write. But you can see that not everything that we're hearing in the narration is what's in the book. For one thing, you actually hear him talking about writing the book, and that's not something you would put in the book. And for another thing, at the end of the movie, he's shrinking away to nothing, and you don't see him scribbling down, about his fight with the spider or anything like that.
Right.
I think that at a certain point, when he shrank too much, when he was doll size, he was no longer writing his book. And so the rest of the story plays out, but we're experiencing it from his point of view, and that's why we get the narration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you were starting to make a point, Ralph, when you started talking about the boat ride, and I think maybe we interrupted you. Or did you finish
it's nice how they very quickly introduce these characters, how you see how carefree and how fun they can be, and what a good relationship they have. And I think that's important, but it was done very quickly. It was very, very much to the point. It was done very sparingly, and that's really good writing. In some movies these days, they'll spend a half hour establishing characters, and you're like, get on with it already. But in this case, that's all it took. And then, boom, we move on. But as far as the narration, at one point, he shows the book to Clarice, who's the woman who's also his size when he's 36 inches high. And she says, you're a good writer. This is good. And he is a good writer because if you listen to his narration, it's very rich language that he uses, very florid. His descriptions, his philosophical musings, it's more than you would get off the average Joe off the street, I would think. So, and not too surprising because, of course, who wrote the script? Richard Matheson. And the use of narration to the extent that you have it in this movie, it does remind one of Twilight Zone episodes, as well it should, since he wrote some of the best episodes from that show. It isn't typical in a movie to have that much narration, that much, inner monologue going on the soundtrack. It would be interesting if someone else had taken this idea and decided not to have constant narration. It would be, well, you don't have constant narration, but there's a lot of narration. It would be a very different movie, and it could still be compelling, but the narration gets you into the character. And so a lot of people will read a novel which is full of inner monologue with all kinds of descriptive passages and things, and then they'll be disappointed because the movie doesn't get you as deeply into the character. This technique gets you very deeply into this character, so you know exactly what's going on, exactly how he's thinking and feeling.
Well, I think too, once he's in the basement, there is no one to have dialogue with. So it's either got to just be shown, exhibited in some way what he's thinking, or there's got to be. And I kind of like this in terms of. I read somewhere how this is sort of like him going through the stages of what somebody goes through that finds out they have a terminal illness. That at first there's disbelief, and then there's anger, and finally at some point you come to the acceptance. And I think that's what, Chad, what you're talking about, that's when you don't really like him, right? When he's lashing out at his wife.
Yeah. And I was just joking around, but
Yeah.
You can, anybody that's been around somebody that has had a terminal illness or some kind of bad diagnosis for something, or they go through those stages, and it's a natural thing. So again, their writing on that was pretty spot on, and it was I don't know. Even I thought it was very sophisticated, even for 1950s audiences, and especially 1950s sci-fi. It was dealing with themes like that, and in a way that just very straightforward. And the wife having to being so long suffering and wanting to help him, but not knowing how, and you could see that on her face. She was just in despair because she felt like there was nothing she could do, and it felt very natural and very it felt very real for it. So and that elevates it way above a lot of the cheesier 1950s sci-fi movies. It makes it a lot more than what a lot of people, they hear the Incredible Shrinking Man, and they just say, then they blow it off as just another cheesy sci-fi film from the 50s. And when it's way, way more than that, with the themes and stuff like that it was dealing with.
Yeah, well, what you're both touching on is based on The 5 Stages of Death by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. The anger, depression, bargaining, acceptance, all these different stages that a person may or may not go through as they're in the dying process. And this movie can be taken as an analog to someone who's going through some kind of degenerative illness like cancer or some other illness for which there is no cure. It's, and I really like the scientific approach they took to the subject, trying to figure out what was wrong, how it starts so gradually. It's 6 months before he starts noticing something different. He notices his clothes don't fit right. And he goes and gets a physical, and he's 2 inches shorter and several pounds lighter than he used to be. And this doesn't make sense. The doctor comes up with explanations that are perfectly logical, that, in the course of a day, you shrink a little bit. Maybe their measurements weren't right when you had physicals in the past. These rational explanations, and saying, of course, it doesn't make sense that a person would be shrinking. That's not something.
Well, and that's part of his frustration too, is he knows something wrong and he can't get anybody to listen to him.
Right.
His wife kind of jokes it off, and the doctor rationalizes it.
But then they do a battery of tests. And,
right.
And ultimately a chromatography test shows that he's been exposed to some pesticide, and they look at how his molecules have apparently been rearranged so that they're no longer growing, but all the organs of the body are shrinking. So, as 50s sci-fi explanations go, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah. Usually we get this fake science. Fake science explanation.
Oftentimes they'll just go with radiation and we're good. But in this case, it's pesticides plus radiation. And that's pretty cool because people didn't think that much about insecticides or pesticides being harmful back in 1957.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, they would have these trucks go through the neighborhood spraying for mosquitoes, and it would just fog the whole neighborhood. And do they still do that back where you live?
When I lived in Florida about a decade and a half ago, the trucks would come down the streets, blowing, and just fog up the whole neighborhood, and you'd have to stay inside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
I've never seen anything like that. I've never experienced that. Gosh.
That sounds really healthy. Right?
Well, something else you might not have experienced.
It's made me what I am today.
Whitney, you probably never experienced a milkman delivering milk to the front door as you see in this movie.
Oh no, never. No.
But that
Yeah,
did
we had-
happen. I remember those days.
Yeah, absolutely. We even had a insulated box on the stoop that he put the cold milk in.
Mhm.
That came from the milk company.
That's cool.
Anyway, I wanted to mention, I think quickly, that the cinematographer is Ellis W. Carter, and this is not the first film that he worked on that we've covered. He also did Curse of the Undead, the Western vampire one from 1959.
Yes.
But also the Monolith Monsters,
Yeah.
which is one I'd kind of like to cover at some point. Deadly Mantis. So the Incredible Mole Men or something. The Mole People.
The Mole People, yeah.
Mole people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, he had a little presence in the
That's some
genre.
cred. No stranger to challenging situations, and this certainly
That's
presented a lot of them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I think he did a decent job. I thought he had some good shots in there.
Yeah. One thing I noticed on IMDb is that there were a number of people who weren't credited. Like we pointed out that Bud Westmore was credited with makeup, but on IMDb, they list 3 other makeup artists as well.
Oh, okay.
No surprise if you know Bud Westmore's track record with respect to giving credit to other people. But that was
well,
the way
that
it
was yeah.
That was the way it was in those days.
Yeah, there's that. I don't know if it's a great story, but the story about how I think it was on Creature that whenever somebody showed up to do photo ops, suddenly Bud Westmore was doing all the work.
Right. Yeah, and when the designer of the creature, Millicent Patrick, who is a woman, of course, was featured in an article in a magazine with pictures of her, that was the end of her career. Bud Westmore couldn't tolerate someone else being given credit like that, so he just blackballed her.
I read a book about her, Lady from the Black Lagoon by Mallory O'Meara. That was actually a pretty good read. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. If you haven't, you should pick it up and read it.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Ralph, about the uncredited, because I see there's some makeup. There's also some special effects they're all uncredited, and one of them is actually listed as the giant match fabricator, which actually that was a pretty impressive effect. The whole, because that thing really fired off. I don't think that was a visual effect. I thought that was a real.
Oh yeah, that was a live pyrotechnic for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, that was very cool. And I actually when he does that, I'm thinking, holy crap! How come he's not getting burned? I'm assuming it was a low temperature, flaming. A substance that ignites at a low temperature, but that was a big flame to have that close to him.
Yeah.
Right.
So prop makers, visual effects artists, there were even 3 extra composers that were listed as uncredited in IMDb. And that makes me wonder, that's very unusual. I'm thinking that possibly some of the music was stock music from the Universal Library that had been composed by these other composers, as opposed to the 4 of them collaborating in some way. That's just speculation on my part, but I think it would otherwise be unusual to have 4 people contributing as composers to a soundtrack like this.
Now, I'm pretty sure that on the opening credits, they list the trumpet player as being Ray Anthony. And here it says uncredited, but he was credited on the...
definitely.
Maybe that was added.
Which itself is unusual, right? I mean, how often do you see a solo instrument player being credited like that? Yeah. And he was quite a trumpet player. So, think about how the music works. Sometimes it's very brooding and foreboding. Sometimes it's playful and light. Sometimes it's mysterious and wondrous. And then when you have the tarantula, of course, it goes, full tilt gonzo. You've got kettle drums, and brass and woodwinds just playing their hearts out and really playing up the terror. So quite a variety of moods in the movie, especially from the very beginning.
The one place that it really hit me as being kind of out of place was when he was trying to convince his wife that he had shrunk, and they were in the bedroom and he had his bathrobe on, and he goes, they kiss, and he says, you used to have to stretch up. And he goes, oh, but you're barefoot. And she looks down at his slippers, and there's just sort of crescendo of, an impactful sound. And I thought, it wasn't quite, I mean, I get it, but that didn't really fit.
Okay, you thought that was maybe a little much there, huh?
But otherwise, I thought most of it was very good. I enjoyed it.
But that's a great example of the subtle transition from full size to doll size at the very beginning. Another one was when they're in the car, and he's talking about how this is going to really affect our relationship. We have to think about that. I'm not going to be the man that you knew. I'm not going to be the same size and shape. That's something this is going to be serious. And she says, oh, come on. When I made that wedding vow, that was for keeps. As long as you have that wedding ring on your hand, I'm yours. And just at that moment, the ring slips off his finger.
Yeah, that's when they needed the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Interesting. Yeah. I actually thought I heard that once, but when I watched it again, I didn't. So I think it was just wishful thinking.
There was some fanfare at times that was similar, but it was definitely not that particular creature sting.
Mm.
No, that was a great timing thing. Anyway, let's talk about some of the actors here somewhat quickly. But, it's hard for me to understand why Grant Williams, who plays Scott Carey, didn't have a somewhat more successful career. I'm not saying he didn't, but he pretty much dies out after he did like 50 episodes of Hawaiian Eye from 60 to 60.
Yeah.
Well, at some period, like a 2-year period, 60 to 63. And then after that, he's kind of relegated to one-off or two-off episodes and things like Perry Mason and Bonanza, and the standard ones that people get multiple things on. And that was about it. And then he finishes off with some really Brain of Blood, which appears to be a pretty low rent. Oh, an Al Adamson movie. There you go.
Yeah. I think that might be a shot in the Philippines. It might be.
Yeah.
One of those.
And another one, Doomsday Machine. Spies discover that the Red Chinese have built a Doomsday Machine. Anyway, it doesn't really say why he left, but he lived for another 10 years after that, and he wasn't old, so it's interesting what brought that out, I guess, because I thought he looked like this is a guy that should be a great leading man that should go on and make lots of appearances, if nothing else, as maybe co-stars, maybe. Anyway.
Maybe, for all we know, it could have been a personal choice.
Yeah, could well be.
I think he was, I think I read he's pretty much stayed a bachelor.
Yeah, if he was on 50 episodes of, was it Hawaiian Eye, you said?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, he probably got a fair amount of money for all that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he just didn't need to work.
Right. Who knows?
I found it interesting in reading about this that they originally wanted the actor Dan O'Herlihy to play this role. The guy, horror fans know him as Connell Cochran from Halloween 3 and the old man in RoboCop. But he did not take it because he didn't want to become typecast in these types of roles, but he ended up being typecast as an old man in Season of the Witch and RoboCop.
That's funny.
Yeah, but I thought that was an interesting point there too.
Yeah, it is, and that they did go with him because they thought he was going to with Grant Williams because they thought he was an up and coming.
Yeah, they thought he was going to be a big star. Yeah.
What about Randy Stewart, who played his wife Louise?
I thought she was awesome in this role. Like you guys were talking about before, the the banter and the back and forth between them was really playful and really it seemed real, and to the point later on where she was just in total despair over her husband and what to do, and her helplessness seemed to really bother her because they seem like a couple who really did things for each other and with the back and forth and complimented each other very well. And when he started to lose his stature or whatever and started to shrink, it did change everything. And as much as she tried, there was really nothing she could do about it. So you could really, really feel that pain and heartache that she was feeling for him. And she really did a good job with that role, I thought.
Yeah, I agree. In some ways, she's the heart of the story. I mean, she's not the main character, but they're at the beginning, they're a team, they're allies, and you can see how their marriage is crumbling apart. You can understand why it's happening, but it is sad, especially when you see how happy they are in the beginning, and you can really see it on both their faces, what a toll this is taking on both of them.
I agree. I'll just say I pretty much echo like the same things that you guys are saying.
Yeah, I liked her. She was she had a nice sort of I don't know how to explain it, but cheerful or easy to relate to demeanor.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And she also didn't. I mean, she kind of quit around. That's kind of weird. After 63, she did a couple episodes of Dragnet and an episode of Marcus Welby in 1975, and that's the end of that. And she lived for another 20 years, 1996. So, again, probably a choice because she seemed to get plenty of roles at the time.
Well, on the other hand, life is unfair, and especially in those days, as a woman gets older as an actress, they're considered less useful to movies, that people want to see pretty young faces on the screen. Then some people, can make a go of it later on in life, like Bette Davis. But this is where the movie business is rather cruel
and shallow.
So it's entirely possible that she didn't have that much choice in the matter. But I am speculating here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in her 2 episodes on Dragnet, she played Harry Morgan's wife. It was Sergeant Friday's sidekick. Sergeant Gannon. Okay. I don't see any other genre stuff, although the one thing that stands out for me is 18 episodes in The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp in 59 and 60, which was a cool show, in my opinion. All right. We also have an interesting one in that Clarice, who is a little person, or a midget, was played by April Kent, although she wasn't, because they had to be the same size roughly because they were sitting in the oversized, furnishings and props. So she also did, I think, a good job, but she only has 6 credits. And all in a 3-year period, 4-year period. So did you guys recognize Dr. Thomas Silver, the guy that did the...
Milburn Drysdale. Was that his name? Was it Milton Drysdale?
No, I think it was Milburn. I think it was. It was Mr. Drysdale.
Mr. Drysdale.
Without the toupee.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So you guys know what we're talking about? You guys...
Beverly Hillbillies?
Beverly Hillbillies, yep, yep. And William Schallert is the other doctor, his personal doctor.
He's been in a lot of things.
I know I've seen him. I don't know where, but I know I've seen him.
Well, I believe, I'm going to look. I know you've seen him too because 387 credits, but I'm trying to think.
I don't remember every one.
I think he was Patty Duke's father in the Patty Duke Show.
Oh, okay.
Does that ring a
Yeah,
bell?
I think so.
That sounds good. Yeah, I can see him.
It's hard to verify because I got to scroll through so many credits to get down to the 60s.
Oh yeah, some people are just too busy.
Well, he was in the
General
He was in the Monolith Monsters too.
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh, there we go.
General Steele and Lassie.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he did. Yes, he was in the Patty Duke Show. Wow, finally got there. 104 episodes, but pretty much everything. You could scroll through there and see all kinds of things that he did. And I'm thinking, wasn't he in the Twilight Zone movie?
Yes.
In the the Evil Kids segment, maybe. Let me look here.
Oh yeah, he was. Was that was him, wasn't it? It's a Good Life segment.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Jerome Bixby one. So, yeah, he was the father. Ooh. All right. So, yeah, I mean, we could go through there and come up with all the genre stuff, but yeah, that'd take too long. One last one I think we have to talk about is Billy Curtis, who plays the midget on the rear projection scene in the
with Clarice
in the diner. Yeah, with Clarice.
Yeah.
So anybody recognize him?
He was in. I know he was in The Wizard of Oz. Superman and the Mole Men. He was one of the little Mole Men guys.
Yep.
High Plains Drifter.
Yeah, High Plains Drifter is the one that was a pretty big part.
Yeah.
1976. The Ringmaster in Monster Squad.
Oh yeah. In the TV series,
Mm-hmm.
this guy too. He had a pretty good working career, 116 credits, and everything but bit parts or to sort of feature. And he was in right about the same time as The Wizard of Oz. He was in sort of an all little person cast film called The Terror of Tiny Town.
Oh my God, no.
Yeah. He's our Batman connection too.
He is. I do. I wrote that down somewhere, but I hadn't.
Yeah. He was in one of the False Face episodes, I believe it was.
Yeah. So gotta have a Batman connection. Oh, and he also played. Oh, this is like a double connection here. So, in the film Man of a Thousand Faces, which actually came out the same year as Incredible Shrinking Man, he played Harry Earls as he appeared in the movie The Unholy Three with Lon Chaney Sr. And Harry Earls is one of the leads for Freak.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So anyway, which we covered. So yeah, double connections, triples. I got to watch that movie again, Man of a Thousand Faces. I haven't seen that for a long time.
The Cagney one?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so Billy Curtis played Harry Earl in the Cagney Man of a Thousand Faces.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. We got. Do we need to talk about the ending, or
It's what
have we?
I'll talk about it. It's one of my favorite endings ever in a sci-fi movie. I mean, a lot of people, especially friends of mine, they watch it and go, what a crappy ending. But you think about it, where else could it go? And it's sort of an anti-Lovecraft, where Lovecraft is like, we're so small and insignificant. The horror is everything out there that could just step on us and not give us a second glance. But here he grows to or shrinks to subatomic level, and he's still has that feeling that he matters, and he says, I exist. And he believes, I think he believed that, or what he was trying to say was that God knows he exists. So he still matters in the universe. But I think you can take that however you want, but I feel like he felt like he was still someone because he was alive and he still had that. So he had no fear going in, even though the world around him is so huge and big, he can't exist in it any longer. So I don't know. I just thought it was a very cool ending and very Matheson too,
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Well, Yes and no, actually. Richard Matheson was unhappy with the movie because that very ending soliloquy was not written by Richard Matheson. Actually, he wrote the novel and the script, and then the script was reworked a little bit. Now, the studio was saying, we can't have it end like this. We need a happy ending. Maybe they find a cure and he gets big again, and they're happily ever after. But they tested it as they had shot as we saw it, and it was successful with the test audience. So the studio's like, okay, go ahead, have the downer ending you want, go for it. But Richard Matheson wasn't happy with the religious references in the ending soliloquy. Like he's saying something like, he's accepting his fate. If the universe can mean something and I'm a part of the universe, then I mean something too. And to God, there is no zero. I still exist. So for that reason, Richard Matheson was actually quite unhappy with the movie just because of that part. Wow. But then his son persuaded him to give it another chance, to look at it again years later, and he could see that it was a good film after all, in spite of that change that he wasn't happy with.
Well, and that's really interesting, because I'd like to see what his script had in there, because I had seen the same thing. But when I pull out my copy of the book and read the last few pages, it's pretty dang close to that.
Is it?
Only instead of to God there is no zero, he says to nature there is no zero.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the difference.
So it's a big difference between religion and natural. So it's I don't know that for Jack Arnold to claim he wrote that whole thing, it seems like a little bit of a stretch. But anyway, this is one of those cases
where paraphrased a lot of it.
Yeah. So anyway, so people they wanted him to grow back to normal, the studio, and have a happy ending. But
there's also talk of a sequel where his wife shrinks down to his size so they can still have a relationship.
Oh gosh.
But how and why would that happen? They didn't make that sequel.
Well, she ran into her own, because that was my first question when I first saw this was, and I can still remember this. They go through the cloud, and I'm going, so just the fact that she was in the hold of the boat kept her from, that was all the shielding she needed from this radiation or whatever. Didn't seem realistic to me. But then when they added in the insecticides or pesticides or whatever it was, then now I guess she would have had to come in. If she'd have done the same thing, she might have been triggered as well. I don't know.
Yeah. So it turned out the insecticide happened first, and then the radiation affected the chemistry in his body so that there were molecular changes going on that, made him shrink.
Yeah. And Matheson, there's some pretty argument that King in Dance Macabre talks about it, that calling this science fiction is kind of a stretch, that really Matheson he was just interested in the concept and is far more interested in the characters than he is the coming up with science, right? There's enough in here and there's enough scientific jargon that's real, that it kind of backs that up a little better than a lot of the science. It's not just they did nuclear testing. Now we have giant black scorpions. Or I did want to talk a little bit about the differences in the book. So Matheson put some things a little more, socially unacceptable in there in the book that were not in this. Maybe it was a little more obvious. I mean, I got the idea from the film now. I doubt if I did when I was a kid, that of having a relationship with the female little person, with Clarice. There was also a drunk homosexual that picks him up, that abuses him. And then also with the carnival, kind of in that same time frame, there was teenage bullies that terrorized him. And in fact, in the book, he has a daughter and there's a babysitter, and he does pulls a peeping Tom on the babysitter as he gets smaller and is less easy can hide better, I guess. All that stuff was left out, which is probably especially for the time, although some of that stuff, it takes a long time to get to the adventure, like you already said, Chad, the cat and the spider. Mm-hmm. If you put these in, it would take even longer. Right?
Yeah. And when you say he has a relationship with Clarice, you mean that he actually has a sexual relationship.
Right,
he has
right,
an affair with her.
Right,
yeah.
right. Sometimes us old guys leave that sex word out. That's like, all right. I don't know. I think we got this covered. Comments? Anybody?
There's one more thing I want to point out from a scientific point of view. He was 180 pounds and 6'2" to begin with. And then there was a week during, there were a couple of days when he noticed his clothes didn't fit the same. And so then he'd lost like 10 pounds and or I'm not sure how much he weighed, but he lost a little bit of weight and a couple of inches. And then when he's 36 and a half inches, he's 52 pounds. I have a problem with that.
Gosh.
Does 52 sound like too heavy or too light to you for a 36 and a half inch high man?
I would say too heavy.
That's right. You see, when someone is twice as tall, they're 8 times as massive. So because it's the cube, it's length, width, height.
Yep.
If he was 180 pounds and he was cut in half, from 6'2" to 36 and a half inches, he would be 22 and a half pounds, not 52. So they had him weighing about twice as much as he really should. Doesn't ruin the movie for me. I just thought I'd.
No. Well, and if we want to go there, we can talk about his voice too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that would probably change.
Yeah, as his vocal cord got tinier and tinier, I somehow think.
That would be kind of comical, wouldn't it, though?
Would have been hard to take it seriously.
Yeah, I think it's dramatic license.
Last comments, Whitney or Chad?
I guess real quick, since we've talked about, we pretty much covered everything. But I don't recall us touching on how much of a struggle it was on, like, it was like back-to-back issues with him, and I felt bad for him, especially when he was trying to like really eat and with that mouse trap, and you watch him trying to get the food from there, and he works so hard, and then seeing that food just go, and at some point in the film he says that he's just tired, or he makes some kind of statement about being too tired to really try or something. I don't know, but
that was a great scene with the mousetrap.
So much tension there, you're looking at him, he's on the mousetrap, he's trying to lift this big piece of cheese, and I'm like, don't do that.
Yes.
You know what mousetraps do. Then he comes up with a way, and it's very scientific too. Like, first he tries to hit the base of that lever with the nail, and that doesn't do it. So then he goes farther away from the fulcrum, and you get better leverage with a greater distance from the fulcrum, and so that time it does snap it. And boy, when it snaps, it just flies.
Yeah, and it's very touchy because it's right on the edge of going, and he has to lift the nail off of the lever. That was a great scene.
Another great scene, in a similar way with building tension, where you're really worried for this little man, is the scene where he is trying to get across this chasm to him on a paint stir stick that is stuck down on one end with paint. And first he tries just prying it up, and he doesn't have the strength to pry it up and make a bridge. And so he figures, okay, I guess I have to climb across and then jump as far as I can to get there. And as he goes to the end of the paint stir stick that's in the middle of this open space, the paint starts coming unstuck little by little, and he has
I thought that was great effect
at the last second. That was really effective.
Whatever they used for the paint, I thought was really believable.
Yeah, you see it coming unstuck and stretching.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, look out, Scott.
Gosh.
Chad, any final comments? Anything you haven't?
I think we covered everything. It's just it's one of those. It's one of my favorite sci-fi horror films. If you want to, people call it a horror film. I don't think it's as much a horror film as it is a sci-fi adventure movie. Everything that I do love about it, there's things that I'm glad little touches like the guy that you guys were just mentioning with the paint stick and all that. I like that they never explained where the mist came from or what it was or what caused it or anything like that. I just thought that was a great thing. And he just sailed through the mist and came out on the other side. That was all you ever got. I don't know if it went into any more detail in the book about what it was, but I liked it that they didn't really, it was radioactive. That's all you had. And that's all you needed to know. And it was just a cool point that I've always liked about that movie too.
I guess as far as touching back on like when you're saying you're not sure if it's horror per se, I mean, I'm not good with a bunch of subgenres, but I guess if you were to categorize this with a subgenre, then it would be body horror because of all of the things that are going on in the situation that he's in, because it's body horror is violations and mutations and mutilations, but I don't really see mutilation, but it's just, it's an unnatural process of the body.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. The body is failing him. It's a degenerative process.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's losing everything. He's just shrinking away to nothing.
So my last comment, one more actor that we've actually covered before, and that's the cat.
Yes, the cat.
Oh.
The cat is Orangey. The cat plays Butch, which is the same cat that played Rhubarb in Comedy of Terrors.
Nice.
Oh.
Do you remember
I hated him in that too.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I knew I recognized that name, Orangey. It sort of sticks in your.
Oh, wow. So both of our animal stars have played in other parts. Yeah.
Yes, in other genre flicks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I really want to thank you, Ralph. I appreciate the. It just kind of fell in line for you to invite you to this one, partially because of the special effects. I wanted to hear your take on that stuff.
Yeah,
and I appreciate the time.
Oh, I appreciate the offer
and the input.
Yeah. It's great revisiting this film. You know, it's been a while since I've seen it, and it gave me a good excuse to check it out again.
Yeah.
You know, you can compare it against other films of this nature, like Dr. Cyclops from 1940 is a really notable miniature people movie. But, you know, you compare it against others of the time, like Attack of the Puppet People or something, and this is definitely one of the best of its kind, for sure.
Well, yeah, and there are other ones. To me, one of the ones that, there's Devil Dolls in the 30s.
Yes.
Which is somewhat similar. And you said Attack of the Puppet People, but the one that sticks in my mind the most is Fantastic Voyage, which was a controlled thing. But that was a big deal when I was in high school when that came out. Maybe because of Raquel Welch, but I think also because it was from an Isaac Asimov novel, and the science fiction and the special effects were pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. And then a sort of updating of that is Inner Space that Joe Dante directed.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and something that you could compare to this, again, is Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Yep.
Which had phenomenal special effects, too. In that case, I actually was contracted at one point to serve on the crew for that. I was going to work on the mechanical effects for the puppet ant. The gigantic ant puppet.
Ooh.
But what happened is, I think it was when Stuart Gordon was attached as director of that project, which at the time was called Teeny Weenies, and he had to bow out because of health issues. He couldn't, with his heart condition, he couldn't shoot at high altitudes in Mexico City. So there was a delay in the production. So even though I'd signed a contract, I got out of it because I could see that the movie was going to take a while before it actually got off the ground. And that's when I got onto another crew working on another film. But anyway, that movie had remarkable effects with stop motion and, model creatures. But I do remember when they were talking to me about this ant, they were saying, well, they're going to do the ant 3 different ways. One is the giant animatronic puppet that the kids actually ride on. Another is stop motion ants, and they did those in the film. They also said, we're going to have real ants that we're going to photograph, and we're going to intercut between all these. And I said, hold on a minute. Have you ever seen a real ant walking? Their legs move so fast, it's a total blur. There's no way you're going to get a gigantic animatronic puppet to move as fast as the legs of a little ant. And indeed, it turned out I was right, because they ended up not shooting any actual live ants to intercut with the giant animatronic and the stop motion. They just went with stop motion, and I think that was a good choice.
That's it for this episode, but every 2 weeks we'll be focusing on a specific film released between 1920 and 1969. Next up is one chosen by Chad. What are we doing next, Chad?
We are doing The Curse of the Werewolf, 1961 from Hammer. Terrence Fisher directed, starring Oliver Reed.
Nice.
Yeah. And I believe we're going to have a special guest lined up for that as well. So stay tuned for that. Plenty of ways to stay in touch with us. Please send feedback to feedback@gruesomemagazine.com or leave comments on Gruesome Magazine's H&R and DOH podcast Facebook group or at the website, gruesomemagazine.com. Catch us again here in 2 weeks for another great horror movie of the classic era, as only decades of horror can do it. Thanks again, Ralph. And thanks again, Chad and Whitney.
Yes.
You are welcome.
Say good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
You were doing your shrinking man voice, right?
Yeah, I was shrinking.